to Cognitive Vigilance podcast. I'm here with Kyle and Salomé Sibonex. I did it. I was a little nervous about that one, but I did it, guys. And I'm actually very excited about this conversation. So I first discovered you before I had Twitter. I saw you on Instagram. I saw like your reels, and I had like just recently gotten canceled. I'm an artist, and I had just recently gotten canceled
Oh my,
in like an art scene community situation and lost a job over it, and it was really traumatizing experience. But and you were talking a lot about like censorship and like kind of the cancel culture in the art scene, and it really resonated with me. And then I found your Twitter, and you are, in my opinion, one of the best tweeters. Like
oh,
underrated.
I really
Like
appreciate that because
everyone needs to follow her Twitter. I love her Twitter.
you
So give us a little background on who you are and kind of your, I know you've had a little bit of an ideological transformation similar to me and, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, so my name is Salomé Sibonex. I'm a writer, artist, speaker, and I'm the co-founder of a publication called The Black Sheep, where I write about exactly what I experienced, which is discovering individualism as a solution to get out of the nasty collectivism that drives things like cancel culture, self-censorship, people pleasing, and authoritarianism in general. And my background, I was born and raised in Miami. I'm Cuban American. And I lived in Miami most of my life until I moved to LA. And that is where I started to get really tested because that is, despite what people might think about themselves or LA, in some ways it is an ideological echo chamber. It's crazy. I'm here right now. And every time I come back, I love this. Like, I love the weather. I love the nature. I love the food, a lot of things that I love. But it is such an ideological echo chamber. Leftism is considered the norm. And so if you deviate from that, you are really an outsider and considered kind of like a weirdo and a threat.
Yeah.
Kind of funny to think about it for LA, like a city that prides itself on being artistic and creative and diverse, but like will immediately outcast people as weirdos if they are not politically conformist. And so that was the place where I first started to question my own leftist beliefs because I grew up in the Tumblr era. I am a victim of Tumblr, and that is something that needs to be studied. I actually haven't seen enough on how Tumblr was the root of evil in some ways. It was the first place I discovered politics outside of the mainstream. And of course, those politics were more radical. And it was in a social network atmosphere. So it came along with all the same things that come along with these social media echo chambers and networks, which is peer pressure, virtue signaling, the desire to fit in, the desire to avoid cancel culture. I remember seeing canceling before we even had a word for it. So
Like
as
on Tumblr or in real life?
on
Like
Tumblr,
it How do you cancel someone on Tumblr?
go figure. Yeah, they were these little echo chambers, like these little collectives where they would suss people out and be like, you're the one that had the wrong opinion. We're going to find out who you are, try to dox you, do that whole thing. And so then I migrated onto other social media platforms as I got older, Twitter, Instagram. And Twitter was where I started to also kind of like, it was natural as a person that is like creatively inclined and wanted to be in the arts to gravitate towards the left because that's who is largely in the arts. And so it
Mm-hmm.
felt like for me, if I want to be a successful artist, I have to ingratiate myself with this leftist art culture. And it took me a long time to realize that that is not actually necessary, and nor is it positive for you. It's actually beneficial to abandon that because a lot of those spaces, like you experience, are highly censorious, highly critical, literally like poison for genuine creative expression that actually helps your culture, as opposed to just being like, I'm saying the right things. Look at me. I'm making the right things. So I started to question as I saw like just increasingly nasty behavior from people. And it was in the riots of 2020 that I really
That's when
started.
I got canceled.
Mhm. Head. We really had like this crazy cultural reckoning there where obviously the pandemic really played a role in making people insane and putting things upside down enough so that people were kind of like jarred out of their normal behavior for better and for worse. Because for a lot of us, we woke up, like actually woke up, not like woke TM. For a lot of other people, they became true authoritarians, cheering on the destruction of private property, like actual violence in the streets, encouraging people who lived in genuinely impoverished communities. Yeah, go out, go protest, go break windows, go do this, like things that could actually get you killed. There were people online sitting in their comfortable chairs away from this being like, I'm an ally, go do those things because that's the right opinion. So you had this like double speak where people would say that I care about equality, I care about justice, I care about people and marginalized communities. And yet I was seeing these people encourage violence, shut down and insult people of the very identities that they claim to care about when they dissented from them, and generally be uninterested in grappling with the reality of like, guys, this doesn't seem to be working. Like, it seems like these ideas are actually bad and destructive, like these kind of like critical race theory ideas, intersectionality. It's making people divided, it's making people actually racist, where they think that they know what a person's beliefs, opinions, and roles in society are based on whether they're white or a man or able-bodied, like these things that were just all over the place at the time. And now I think we're a little bit reining it in. But nonetheless, that was when I put my foot down, because I was just like, I don't care if I'm alone in this. I can't be a part of that. I can't be around people, like a peer of people that aren't willing to say, I don't care if this is the wrong opinion. I'm not going to encourage people to go set shit on fire in their own communities as a way to like do solidarity, because the reality is that person's going to end up killed, hurt, or in jail. And I'm sitting at home and this does not feel right. And so I took that stand. Like, I publicly said that on Twitter. And I remember like being like, I need an emergency therapist meeting, like calling my therapist, like, I need to talk. I just did something really scary. I don't know what's going to happen. I think I'm going to get canceled.
Was your Twitter like all leftists at this point?
It was definitely more left leaning. Like,
Yeah.
I was like slowly toning it down, I think. But I had started to actually put out any opinions that would indicate I wasn't a leftist. And so I had this following of people that I had like taken from Tumblr and kind of found on Twitter as I was doing that thing of like, okay, where are the artists? Where are the like people that seem to care about the issues that I care about, right? Progressivism, like, let's have the Bernie Sanders socialism, like, where are they? And so those were the people I sought out and started to try to be like, you know, I was like 22, 23 at the time, and very much still like forging my identity. And I think we forget how much humans are just like these mimetic beings, where we very much learn by imitation and mimicry. And so I was like, okay, I think I want an arts career. I think the way to solve the problems that I see in the world, like poverty, like injustice, like inequality, is the only people that I see caring about that, because it doesn't seem like Republicans do. And at least if they do, the language never gets to me. And so, okay, these are the people for me. So I would seek them out and then be like, okay, like, so what do they say? What do they make fun of? What do they like? Okay, let me look into these things. And of course, all of this is not like this conscious. It's not like I'm like, let me act out this role. Like, it's very much this kind of like natural sense of like, okay, if I want to be this kind of person in this community and whatever, then these are the people that I need to be around and the things I need to do, because that's what they do and that's what they like. Okay. And so I would write things that I kind of like had some desires to some interest in, but also like tweak my writing to fit these kind of like identity politic narratives, where it was like, as a Latina, my experience, you know, shit that I would never write now, because I'm like, that's whack as fuck. Like, I'm never walking around being like, as a Latina, like, who That's not I don't wake up and I'm like, oh, another day as a Latina. Like, not people are like, that's how people who are obsessed with identity are. But I felt like I needed to pander to that because these were the people who were publishing work. These were the people that were running the galleries and the things that I saw. Eventually, I realized, thank God for the freedom of social media and the internet, as long as we have it, I can make my own space. I can make my own publication. I can do my own things. I don't need these people. But nonetheless, so I posted this Twitter thread. It was like the first time I was like, okay, I'm really taking a political stance that I have not seen anybody really take. And I think I'm going to get my ass kicked online for it. And the opposite happened. It actually led me to be connected with people that I still am friends with today, like Aisha Akambi and Africa Brooke and all these other people in that kind of sphere that was at the time like this.
I love her too. Akisha, is that her name?
Aisha.
Aisha, I love her.
She's amazing.
She's another Twitter, another person on Twitter that I really like base tweets. She doesn't tweet very much. I wish she tweeted more, but
I know. Yeah, I know. That's also probably why her tweets are awesome, because she really comes when she has something genuinely great to say. So I respect it. But yeah, so I connected with these people because of that. And it was really the first time in my life that I started to consciously develop a much more individualistic personality and belief system, where I lived the experience of realizing there's something better than just playing it safe. Yes, I'm putting myself out by contradicting this community that I know, like I watch them on a daily basis eat people alive for the smallest differences. I know that I'm putting myself out there, but now I realize I'm getting something so much better in return for doing that than the safety I was getting all prior to that by being like, let me just like not say things. Like, I think that's actually wrong, but I'm kind of gonna just not. And it's gone from there where now I'm just like, people would like it if I would stop saying things that they don't like.
I mean, it happens on the left, on the right too, though. Now, like, because it's not even just the left anymore, where they're like, because I that's where I experienced it first, and then now, like, I'm in more. I would say my Twitter is more right leaning, probably, and I feel like I get the exact like similar energy from people on the right. They both do it.
It's kind of funny because now we've kind of have this whole ecosystem, and there were a whole ton of buzzwords and phrases that I was thinking of as you were speaking, Salome. And one of the things I was thinking about was like kind of how there's almost like an algorithm, right? Like a YouTube algorithm. When you start watching one video, then it feeds you, okay, so like let's say you're more left leaning. Whereas like I'm starting to look more into like left leaning people because I grew up more right wing. You know, I'm an auto mechanic, have been for 11 years. My family, you know, I'm surrounded by small businesses and more right leaning people. I mean, I walk outside my house and there's Trump signs everywhere. And like I don't have a bone with that, but I never grew up in like a big city or anything like that. So like hearing from more left-wing perspectives has been really, really interesting for me over the last couple of years, because once again, I just never kind of heard this worldview. So kind of like you said, when you're trying to find your way in this space, like let's say you kind of hang around some more left-leaning people, then you start kind of going down like this YouTube algorithm. So like, you know, okay, let's say you watch the Young Turks, and then, you know, maybe that feeds you the Majority Report. And then maybe you get over to like, I don't know, some other left-wing news outlet. And then eventually, you know, you kind of get sucked into that whole algorithm that, I've heard somebody call it like I think it's a reality tunnel or something like that, where you just kind of get sucked down. And then eventually that's kind of like your whole worldview. And I think right now, the right part of America, if you will, I don't say right half, because let's face it, like half of America does not vote. So I don't think you can necessarily say it's appropriate to say like all Trump people are half America and then left is, you know, people who support Kamala are half America. I think that's just grossly inaccurate. But like, I think right now, the right part of America has enough like social capital, so to speak, that now they can kind of get sucked down in these reality bubbles. And now they're starting to get into more like cancel culture, where if like you don't agree with them about like, you know, let's say that little country over in the Middle East, then they want to cancel you. Or, you know, or if you don't toe the line on their religion or something like that, then you get canceled for that. And just kind of throw a little bit more fuel on the fire of everybody being canceled here. I was supposed to be an automotive technician instructor. And because of my political beliefs that I proudly exposed, and I use my, you know, my real name, Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get that job, and it was funny because I had people from all over this side of the country call into that school and give me, thumbs up and everything like that. So the saying now for me is I could have had a pension, but I decided to be a retard on the internet. So best to make like light out of it. But I'm sure you're aware that just cancel culture isn't necessarily like a straight up left thing. And like I said, I know you know that, but
It's so
it
great.
basically is, now the right has enough social capital now that, okay,
Mhm.
we can go into Home Depot and get Linda fired now.
I know.
The Home Depot example, I was waiting. Like, let me bring up the Home Depot example because that
Good.
was at that point you can't deny it anymore. I know
Yeah.
people like say that cancel culture is the left wing thing and like, oh well, they're the ones that do more damage, blah blah blah. It's like, okay, great. Like, are you waiting to the point that it's really bad to say that it's not a good thing to do? Like, what are we waiting for? I think you should not do bad things ever, not just because, oh, but they're worse when they do it. Like this is terrible. And I remember seeing that happen. I was just like, okay, so we're officially past that point. We really are doing that, where it's like people who once were loudly against cancel culture even built their platforms potentially against cancel culture and talking about how bad that is and how much we need a society that doesn't allow for that to happen. Now suddenly being like, but it's different this time. It's different when it's me that wants to cancel someone. I have a good reason. Unlike those people, their reasons are bad. So that's been really disappointing for me. And it's why a lot of the time, like I speak and I write in terms of principles, and then I'll tie it to politics, because I find that if you get too ahead of yourself into the politics only part, you may not understand that like good politics are based in good principles.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
speech, like it's always free speech, whether you like the speech or not. That's the principle of free speech. And so it doesn't need to, now, of course, you can talk about like which side of the political aisle and which political philosophies are the best at defending it, all these things. But the reality is free speech is still a thing that we can define per the principle of it means allowing people to say what they want to say, despite whether you like it or not, or whether you think it's harmful to society or whatever. And so you see a lot of this kind of like just lack of principled cycle repeating, where it's like suddenly things that were once criticized on the left are now being justified on the right. And that's it's both a very depressing thing and it's an opportunity, because I think there are people, I assume like yourselves, who see this and have the sense that the solution to the left is not just running with the same zeal and blindness to the right.
Yeah.
It's about actually learning what the problems are and what the solutions are, and being nuanced in the understandings, as opposed to just like, oh, okay, so I do the opposite. This is how you get a lot of the like really intense discourse around Israel, where it's like, oh, if they are the ones that are anti-Israel, well, I got to go all the way in the other direction.
Right.
Here's the bill to criminalize speech that criticizes Israel.
Right.
It's like, okay, so we're back to square one.
Exactly. Yeah. And one of our friends who's been on the show a couple times, Ryan Stone, who doesn't really talk politics, he put this in a really interesting perspective from like more of like the red pill manosphere kind of talking points when it comes to like frames. So like where you kind of understand the world from your own perspective. And I like the way that you kind of came at politics through a more principled lens, because I don't think a lot of people do that. It's always, and you see this with discourse surrounding Trump, which is so frustrating because they say, oh, well, Trump has all the right enemies. Well, it doesn't mean that he's right. Just because a lot of the
No.
wrong people hate him does not mean that he's right. Like we can assess
The enemy of the
people-
enemy of your enemy isn't always your friend. Like,
right.
Quote, like there's literally a famous quote about it.
Yeah, you can assess each person individually according to your own principles. And really, that's kind of what you should do and decide, okay, well, do I want to support this person? Yes or no? It should just be, well, he makes, people that I don't like upset, so he has to be right on something. It's like, no, because guess what? That, that axe is going to come back for you. And that's always what I tell people. And as somebody who, has been quote unquote canceled, I mean, I'm still relatively well off, but, once again, if you want to swing that sword around, don't worry, it's going to come back to cut your head off next if you want to continue to swing that in other people's faces, when really, and I think this is a little bit of a positive development, but I mean, like with social media and the explosion of alternative media, which I think is kind of a swamp in some respects. But like the good note here is that like people are almost uncancelable at this point, because we all kind of know how everybody thinks now at this point. And if you really want to find out how people think, you could just do a quick Google search, which back to the story where I didn't get this instructor job, I made it through 3 interviews and like 2 sit downs after that. And then they're like, oh yeah, we saw your social media and we decided that we can't hire you. And it's like, well, you didn't just go onto Google and type my name in like before you even interviewed me.
Yeah.
That takes you 2 seconds and you could have found out what I'm all about. And on top of that, like if we made through these interviews, don't you think you would have seen like a little bit of a crack or something like that? Or I wouldn't be able to get people to call on my behalf to speak positively about me if I was some kind of, schizoid psychopath or something like that. Like people generally who are like really psychopathic or really malevolent typically don't have like a good network of people around them. So I just like that kind of shit's bizarre. But yeah, this idea that like we can cancel people for the right reasons, that always comes back to bite you. It's probably better if we just say, hey, I hate what you're saying, but you know what, man, rock on. And, I play in a band as well. There's tons of music I don't like, and there's tons of messages in music that I don't like, but you separate the art from the artist. And if you don't like their music, hey, it is what it is. I mean, I'm not the biggest Led Zeppelin fan, but I'm like, yeah, I respect what they did for music, rock on. If you like Led Zeppelin, carry on. Me, I like Pantera and heavier music.
Yeah. No,
So one thing I wanted to touch on, so I feel like this like pursuit of being viral and engagement is really like affecting like artistic integrity. It's infecting. I feel like, especially I see it a lot on Twitter, where it's like people aren't even posting things that are true. Like, I mean, this has been a thing on social media for a while. Like, but
Selling
like,
your ass for clout.
yeah, I feel so, since I haven't had Twitter for very long, and I feel like I see it more and more where everyone is kind of like losing their integrity for the sake of virality. And this is like not just a left issue or right issue. I think everyone's doing it.
yeah, it's crazy. I'm so glad that you see it too, because I feel insane. I'm watching people that like I respected. I was like, okay, you seem like one of the people that's got your head on relatively right. And then it's like they're posting the very like, what do you notice type of shit. Oh my God, aren't you embarrassed? Like, we know what you're doing. And look, I'm not going to knock the hustle in every respect. I get it. There's money to be made now. And so people fall in line. But
do you think the monetization of Twitter was a benefit? Or I don't know. I'm like not convinced I think it was a benefit. I almost feel like it wasn't.
It creates a bad incentive because like Ian Miles Chong, Elijah Schaefer, Libs of TikTok. Like the problem is that like they advertise and they really, I think, use stuff that is like legitimately bad, but they display it in a way that's so hyperbolic that it makes you think that like this kind of stuff is happening right down the street from you.
It's demoralizing.
Exactly. Yeah. You go outside and you're going to find somebody who's an atheist who vehemently probably disagrees with you, but guess what? You're still going to go to the restaurant and you're still going to do whatever you could do. And like when I see these people, like the videos of like the immigrants doing bad things or like even black people doing bad things, it's like you said, it's demoralizing. And they share these videos and then like you go outside and everything's fine. Like these people just, like where I don't see a black person beating the living shit out of a little white girl on the corner of my street. Like
never have my entire life. Right. So, I completely agree. And it's one of the weird things that we're in a lot of trouble as a culture and as a people, because I mean, it's not just the United States that uses social media. Ultimately, humans are going to have to figure out how we deal with this technology. And I've been thinking more and more about past technology revolutions, like the printing press or whatever it is that just fundamentally changed humans, because at a certain level, like the technology changes us because we interface with it so much and it impacts us. And this is what I think people don't honestly take seriously enough, and why, like, well, I'm like, I get it. I get you're making your money, whatever, but like, be wary of what it does to you, because ultimately, like,
staring into the abyss, man.
yeah, like an agent of chaos in a way. And it's like, honestly, the barista is doing better work for their society and community than you are posting these videos, be like, what do you notice? What do you notice? Because people are impacted by these things. Like, our brain, okay, it's so crazy. Like, I'll see these videos every now and then. I remember there was like a brief moment where Twitter was like real messed up and everybody was like, why am I seeing tons of violent videos show up on my feed all of a sudden? Like, I saw a lot of people saying that they had this issue with their feed where they're like, I don't watch these videos, but I sure am seeing an unusual ratio of them. And I was one of those people. I was like, oh my God, these videos are terrible. Like, I need block, show it away, whatever. Because it's just like, I didn't like when the mainstream legacy news did this shit. I would watch when my parents would sit down and watch the daily news and they'd be like, oh, you know what happened today? Somebody shot somebody. Scary, right? What is happening to our community? I'm like, do you know how many people there are in the entire country? Everybody is shooting someone at some point in this country. There's like hundreds of millions of people. What is unusual is the fact that we can have that reported on 24 hours a day. Yeah. And so that's the weird part about, like, how do we grapple with this insane ability to almost be like omniscient, where it's like,
yeah, we're not meant to know what's going on. Like, we never have historically. There has been bad shit going on at all points in time, all throughout history. But right now, we're hyper aware of it. And everyone thinks that that means that life is worse now, when it's actually, in my opinion, better than it's ever been. Right. But we can't see that because all we see is all the bad shit because it's right in front of our face.
Yeah, and I always bring this back to like nutrition stuff because, you know, really when you look at like nutrition sciences, there's so much readily available data that you can understand, like the way the human body works with different foods and, you know, the way human metabolism works through protein, carbs or fats. And like, we never had that technology or knowledge before. And now, like, you know, we could do what we're doing right now, where technically you're 2-3 hours before us right now. And we're talking, you know, it's beautiful and sunny out there where, you know, it's pitch black where Brandy and I are. We could never do this before, but now, you know, because you always get this constant drip of information. People know that, hey, if I can give you anxiety, then I can typically kind of sell you something on top of that. So, you know, I always talk shit about Tim Pool because I think he's just like he's just like this awful gremlin. But once again, if I can sit there and keep telling you Civil War, Civil War, Civil War, but hey, make sure you buy my coffee so you can support independent content creators to give you the news that you want to hear, Civil War, and then buy my food bucket, then guess what? You could stop Civil War if you just buy the Timcast membership. And that's what people do. But, you know, that's why I really respect more people who are a little bit more like, hey, this is the information. You do what you want with it. But so many people now can't remove their own feelings from stuff. And I understand we all have a bias to some degree, but like the people who can remain as detached as possible from giving you that information are the people that I like the most. But once again, it doesn't sell to give you detached information, to just tell you, hey, this is what happened. You can decide how you look at that. If I tell you that, you know, oh my God, Trump did this, Kamala did this, or, you know, Kamala's a communist or Trump's a fascist, then immediately your emotions get going because you think, once again, what's everybody saying? If Kamala wins, we don't have a country. Right. It's like, relax. Everything's going to be okay. We've been through worse.
I think Joe Rogan was like was one that really, that's why he got so big, because I think that, like, and when I think alternative media, when he first started, I've listened to Joe Rogan since like his podcast first started. It has changed a lot. It is not what it was when it first began. But at that time, it was like him with a group of his friends just shooting the shit. And like he would have like authors and stuff on. And they would just like really like have a conversation. Like he wouldn't be like making like bombastic claims. Like he would sometimes like, you know, he's a comedian, so go into some rabbit holes. But it was more just like presenting stuff and just having a conversation about it. Less I'm trying to like convince you of this, or you need to think in this particular way. And like I would say that in my opinion, I think he was kind of like this beginning of alternative media shift. But I don't consider any of these people that are like have millions of followers, I don't consider them alternative media. Like I don't consider Candace Owens alternative media. I don't consider Tim Pool alternative media. Like I'm sorry, you're mainstream now, bitch.
Exactly.
Like even Joe Rogan's mainstream now. Like yeah, you might have been alternative once, but you're not anymore. You've gone past the limit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a weird thing. Like, I think this is not new to claim this, but it's harder for it to happen, which is we're going to need to evolve as people to be more judicious in the information we consume. And the reality is that it will become an evolutionary benefit to be able to do that. Because if you can't act on correct information, you're going to have bad outcomes. That's always been how it is. Whether you were looking for berries in the bushes and you were like, I'm sure this berry with a bunch of holes in it and like moldy stuff, I'm sure that's fine. That's not correct. You made an incorrect decision and you died and your gene line was ended. In the same way, if we make decisions based on information like, oh, actually, all men are inherently misogynistic and I should be a girl boss until I'm 60. I don't need a man, whatever. This is feminism, whatever it is. This kind of like narratives that you see, that it's like these like weird narratives that develop on social media and then spread to people. And they just kind of like take them in, just like I once did, because I didn't have any yet. So I was like, sure, that sounds fine. That makes me feel really good, actually, because I'm deeply insecure. So if you tell me that I can blame other people for my problems and keep them away and they're the bad guys and I'm actually just the long-suffering saint, nice. I'm going to try that out. And then it takes an incredible amount of like self-reflection or hitting the bottom to be able to say, maybe there's something wrong with the way I'm looking at the world. Maybe I have bad information. And we're just getting bombarded with bad information all day long at an unprecedented rate. And all the mental health aspects aside of like just feeling crazy and chaotic because like, oh my God, there's people fighting in the street all the time. Like my nervous system, my sense of security is jeopardized because I'm watching these videos and I'm seeing these people fighting on the internet all the time. It's just like, that feels bad. You know, like I think of it in, would that be a normal life if it was not on your screen? What would it feel like? How would you judge your life?
You're living in a war zone.
You would be living in a deeply unsafe, terrible place. And so you would feel deeply unsafe and terrible. But when it's on a screen, we know intellectually that it's like, that's there, that's not here. But your old ass primitive alligator part of the brain doesn't know that. Your heart rate still raises. You know, you still get that sense of like, oh, when you see people like knock someone out in a video, that's why we watch movies, because we actually still feel the real things in relation to the symbols, to the visuals. And so I think we're just in a place where now this gets into government things, because the problem is that we have a society that insulates people from bad decisions to a degree that I think harms them. Like I remember I was in New York recently and there was this sign on the subway that it was like, don't climb on top of the subway and try to ride it on the top. And I was like, who the fuck needs that sign? We are in a bad place if we need this sign on the subway. Who does it occur to be like, you know what? I'm going to climb on top of this thing and I'm going to ride it like Spider-Man in the subway dark tunnel. Well,
Teenage boys.
Yes. Lo and behold, literally the next day, there was a news headline that was like, teenage boy killed trying to do exactly that. And listen,
typical
work. So regardless, the sign apparently doesn't work. You know, obviously, like, I rest in peace. That's terrible. Teenage boys' brains are insane. So they make terrible decisions because they're like literally kind of crazy at that time of their life. So they need help. It's not like, hey, whatever happens, whatever happens. But we have this for adults now. We have like a very safe society where it's like, whatever bad decisions you make, like our society is still relatively comfortable. Like you can kind of just, you can eat yourself to death. You can take drugs to death. And I'm not saying to ban anything, but like they're comfortable. They allow us to be numb and to make bad decisions and still kind of have a roof, still kind of have groceries, like, you know, and that's kind of good in a way, because it's like, okay, otherwise you would die. But the thing is, we're in this weird place now where people are kind of like allowed to live in these like lesser states where they don't feel the ramifications of their bad decisions for like a very long time.
You can avoid personal responsibility.
Yes. And so it's not like I'm saying like, oh my gosh, get rid of grocery stores or whatever crazy thing that someone would want to misinterpret that. It's that we need to be more sensitive to the lives we live and to like being aware of what consequences follow our actions. And I think that we're in a society that really doesn't make that happen for like a long time, where you can get away with having bad ideas, having bad habits, bad behaviors, and like you get all these things that justify them, and you're able to navigate through life for a long time like that. And so that's what essentially is like the culture war. It's like bad ideas, and there's starting to be some ramifications
Bad
of that.
ideas fighting with each other.
Yeah.
Because there's bad ideas all around, like on all sides. But what do you think, like, what can we what's your advice like for people trying to kind of navigate like the internet and like finding good information, and how do you think people should stay more, I mean, this podcast is called Cognitive Vigilance, so
Yeah.
how can people stay more cognitively vigilant on the internet?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a question that I also need answers to, because I don't know all the answers to that. One, take it way more seriously than you do. Whatever level of severity you think that being on the internet warrants, increase it, because it's way worse and way more impactful than you probably think it is. And I am speaking to myself as someone that still checks my phone way too goddamn much. And I'm like, it won't matter if I just kind of sit on my phone for a little bit now. And it's like, it does. It actually does. Because all of it impacts you. All of it, whether it's subtle, whether it's just in the sense that it takes your attention away from things that would be more rewarding, more meaningful. And then this is just slow decline, this slow sense of cynicism and bombardment and demoralization, as you consume constantly content that kind of like drains you or depresses you or is just like not fulfilling, you know? And so this brings me to my other antidote, which is good art. This is something that I have to remind myself, because I'm often like really busy and kind of like overworking myself and things like that. And I often struggle to just like let myself watch a movie and just like chill out, or like go do something like that it's just pure artistic consumption. But every time I do, I'm like, oh, that's right. This is what keeps you sane. Like, it's actually really necessary. Like, whether it's a concert or just like sitting in the dark and listening through to your favorite album from start to finish, or like the movies, the classics, you know, good movies that make you remember why humanity is worth saving, that make you want to recommit to what you value. Those things are medicine. Like, it's I think in some ways we're one of the things that I criticize about like our short form content ecosystem and like media ecosystem is that like it's kind of like low brow, and it takes up the time that we would use for like better art and long form art also, where it's like,
Oh, it's completely destroying our attention span. Like,
yeah.
And people have a hard time like sitting through movies. Jonathan Hyatt, I just watched a podcast with him, and he has a book called The Anxious Generation, and how this is affecting Gen Z in particular. And the short form content is really actually, it's so more destructive than I think people realize when it comes to our attention span. It's affecting kids' ability to have like executive function skills. It's affecting so much, and we don't even realize it because it just seems like, oh, I'll just scroll on TikTok. I don't have TikTok because I think it's the devil. But like for example, like I know a lot of people that love TikTok so much, and even Twitter. Okay, I do have a little bit of a Twitter problem, but and that's also short form content for the most part, and it's so easy for you to just I actually just read a thing that I think it affects like the gray matter in your amygdala. Like I think there's like all sorts of shit that it's like actually doing to our brains too. Like it's wild, and people will go on these tangents about like pornography and all this stuff, and I'm like, I mean, you can like yeah. But like, I bet you're on social media more than you watch porn. Like,
right. Well, yeah. to a point that Salome was making earlier is that we're so readily able to just sedate ourselves.
Yeah.
So I mean, like you think about, you know, free access to porn, you know, going off the gold standard, you know, readily available calories. I mean, if you look at
Mhm.
like when we were kind of able to get all this stuff, I mean, it's just skyrocketing on how much people ate, and we just do so much less. So you know, I always throw the line out there when people talk about civil war or really kind of anything going on right now is that as long as there's free access to porn,
Mhm.
food, or as long as you can have a blizzard, watch porn, and drink a high noon, then there will never be a civil war because you're way too comfortable and you are way too sedated to ever do anything.
Yeah.
And really, we are much too comfortable nowadays. Like, you know, Brady and I were talking before the show about kind of staying a little bit more physically active, but I mean, that's kind of like an artificial way to apply difficulty upon yourself. But like, you know, I have a Twitter problem too, but like, you know, you got to find ways to place
I
difficulty
take
on yourself and kind of remove.
hiatuses.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely good for you. I probably should too, but like, um, you know, you got to find a way to kind of break out of those sedations and do things that are actually difficult because if not, then you end up in this endless, you know, doom scrolling and hey, you know, I'm just gonna sit here and eat a blizzard and chill on the couch, Netflix and chill and all that kind of stuff rather than going out and actually doing something and accomplishing something because
Yeah.
you know, I always say that like health is like a birthright, right? Because our bodies are capable of great things if you put in the work for it. But you know, the problem is that now so many sedations are readily available to you that you can no longer do or that you don't want to do things that make yourself great.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that is like that your last line, like make yourself great. I it's hard because like I'm not trying to just do like a self-help thing, like be great, you know.
Mm,
It's so much more important than that in some ways.
mm,
I think about it in terms of like the hero's journey. Like I'm reading a
Mm.
lot of Joseph Campbell lately because I've just been like, oh my
Love
gosh,
him.
oh he's amazing. He's actually so underrated, even though he is not doesn't seem underrated. Like
Yeah.
he's rated because I look at as someone that's very kind of steeped in political commentary, despite that not being my primary discipline. I eventually got there because I was like, somebody's got to represent artists that are not leftists. So I guess I need to give the takes. But I get really tired of the political sphere because a lot of the time it's just people talking past each other and talking to their tribe and like clapping, like, yeah, those guys suck. Yes. And it's like, this feels very mechanistic. And
Mm.
there's something I think for me as like an artist, I always seek this like what's new? What is the deeper level? How can I push this? It's just if you want to make anything good, like there always has to be this thing of like there's some tension, there's some resistance, and you've got to go there. So it can't be this kind of like mechanistic thing of like, oh, I just repeat the same things over again. Like I came up with a good phrase and now I just make it over again. Like that's rote, that's
Mm.
lacking in that kind of like creative integrity that leads to growth of whatever it is, whether it's you or the discipline or the culture that you're contributing to by trying to move the discourse further, as opposed to just being like, let's repeat slogans at each other. And so I have been turning instead to the ideas of myth and like, what
Mm.
is the function of myth in our culture? Because I don't actually think we have many cultural myths anymore that we genuinely believe, unless you're actually religious and like really believe in like the crucifixion and all these things, and that can guide you. But as a culture, we don't even really have that. And whatever, there's problems there because it's like maybe our culture is too big. Maybe we have a nation that is too big and we are trying to all be like united under this like huge thing when really we've far surpassed like that Dunbar's number of like, I can account for 100 people in my tribe and that makes sense. Like after you go past it, it's like, how do you really have a society with hundreds of millions of people? A lot of them are really, really different from you. And you're trying to have a really big central government that tells people what to do. And a lot of them don't want to do those things. So it's like, it's a recipe for disaster unless you have like really decentralized government that, okay, like we can all live under the United States, but we're minding each other our business. And like, you can do California and we're going to do Arkansas and
Because
whatever.
everyone culture is going to want to have their own myths, right?
Yes.
Like,
mhm,
so, like, that's the problem, is that there's too many different cultures and conflicting myths. Myths are fighting.
And that culture war, like that in some
Mhm.
ways, very much what the culture war is. It's the myth war. And if
Yeah.
you way like leftists talk, it was always fascinating to me, like being on the inside and then going on the outside, because I was like, ooh, I don't know what's going on in there, and it's not what you are saying it is. Like it's very much these like symbolic discussion where like men represent something and like whiteness represents something and the United States represents something. And like a lot of the time, like the way I see, at least for the left largely, but like the right does this as well, they turn each other into God and Satan, where it's like, that's evil, we are good. And it's like, we're just reinventing religions here with like the duality and like evil and good. And so that obviously is not going to ever be solved, because politics isn't myth. It was not
Exactly.
to be that. And so my problem is like, okay, something's wrong with our politics because we're subverting the need for myth into the political sphere, which of course blows it up, because the political sphere is compromise based on ideally based on facts, and like, okay, so here's the policy, okay, but like my constituents want this, like, okay, well, we can give you a little bit of this, okay, well, what if we tried this? That's not what myth is. Myth is, you are evil, I am good, we shall triumph, so on, so on. And so I look at this and I'm like, what is the solution to give people the correct outlet for that desire for a personal myth and a collective myth? And I think that's why I'm studying like the hero's journey in terms of like, how do you even apply that to yourself? And so to bring it back to your question of like, how do you maintain your integrity and like not lose your mind on social media? I really think it's like, honestly, I'm experimenting with the idea of just like, you are the hero and you are in the movie. And what would the hero in the movie do? Would they spend a lot of time on their phone fighting with people? Would they buy into these kind of like simplistic narratives and just like get in line as a foot soldier for whatever politician has been pushed on you now? That's not a very interesting movie, and that is definitely not a hero arc. And so if you look at it more in terms of this like progression, right? Like that's what life is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a progression, because if you're stagnant, like you're in decline, that means you're also at the mercy of others who are progressing. And so you're going to be in this like really negative mental state, whether you know it or not, because you know that you can't hold your own and that you're at the mercy of those who are progressing.
You're the side character. You're not the protagonist, right?
You're not the main character.
You're not the main character.
And you know how, like, think of like these movies where it's often the second in command that's the really like evil person, because they're the ones that desperately want the power that like some other person has, but they didn't have the guts to go after it, or like they made some mistakes in their life and they never they never like fixed those mistakes, and so they like have this like brewing resentment. And so it's really easy to become that kind of like bitter side character, and that's how you get communism, but that's a different story. That's a story time. And so my thing is just like, I come at it from two levels, which is just like that personal myth, like creating of a personal myth, which as soon as you look at it that way, it's like, oh yeah, the hero wouldn't do this. Just things become very clear in that way, but it's like, it's kind of an awkward thing to apply, because it's kind of like, it's a weird self-aware construction of a belief system, whereas in the past we always had these belief systems given to us by our culture, and it was like, this is real, this is like God made the world, and that's why you are here, and that's why you must do this, and da da da. And so it's just like, okay, this explains everything, I know what to do. But like for a culture that increasingly, even if you are a Christian in the US, a lot of them still don't believe anymore in like the creation myth. And so Campbell's work explains like the different things like a myth needs to do. And one of those things is like explain why you should have awe for the world. And I think that if you've lost that ability to believe in like the faith claims of some of your religion, like the creation of the world in 7 days, you lose some of that, like, why should I feel awe for this world? Instead, you start to notice like the reality that is bad, which is like, oh my God, every day people are dying, blah, blah, blah. And it's like this sense of cynicism and resentment sets in, and then you go downhill from there. And so personal myth is important. And then the other thing that I was going to say about that, oh, it just left me my train of thought. There's something about what you need to, oh yeah, okay. So the other thing is like, okay, how do I say this? I really dislike one particular thing that I see social media do. And it goes to your question, which was great. And I'm just so happy that you said it, about what the engagement farming shit does to us. So in many ways, this is the opposite of creativity. It's the opposite of art, because it is so formulaic. It's like the worst kind of advertising. And sure, advertising can be art, but like commercials are more, like Super Bowl commercials and shit are more artistic by far than like the creativity that goes into engagement farming posts. So, you know, at a certain level, it's like you are compromising your ability to look at the world in an expansive way when you let social media train you to create engagement bait. It is how you start to look at things, because it's like, ooh, would this video make good engagement bait? How can I write a clickbaity phrase that'll really make people think there's something worse going on here than there really is? Like, it is like literally dealing with the devil, in my opinion. Like, it's the worst thing that you could let your brain spend time doing. And it is absolutely the opposite of like the kind of creation, right? Like, if you think of creation as this like so powerful human act that can be a force for good, and so what do you do with that power? You create engagement bait, like you know, like,
well, it's unfortunate because it's incentivized.
yeah.
Like my biggest tweets are my stupidest. That's like my worst. Like I will post like this well thought out, like well researched tweet, and like I'm really proud of it. It gets nothing. I post like the dumbest shit, and it's like I got like 30K.
Yep.
Likes. So it's it's incentivizing you to not be creative and to like actually not like to be retarded. It is. It's kind of incentivizing really bad behavior.
I used to one of my co-hosts on 5 Till Midnight, and I like this guy, but he was doing stuff like legitimately saying stuff he didn't believe just to get clicks and likes. I'm like, come on, man. Like, I would much rather have the audience that's here for me and who they know me for, rather than just me. I see accounts that do this all the time. All of them will ask the same exact question, worded the exact same way at the exact same time. I'm like, fuck you. I'm blocking every single one of you. I don't want to see that stuff. And like the people who just post endless rage bait videos, like you said, it's like selling your soul, because once again, all you're doing is just it's selling your whole ass for clout. I hate that shit. It should be, hey, I want to build an audience of people who are genuinely interested in what I have to say, what I'm doing, or what I'm about. Or, you know, and like, if you don't like me, that's okay. I'm probably not your flavor then. But like, just this shit of just trying to get eyes for the sake of eyes, like, I don't know, man. Like, what's gonna happen when you say something these people disagree with? I'd much rather have somebody who critically thinks about the way that I think about stuff and like can understand where I'm coming from, rather than people just come in to throw shit at the wall. And I know there was somebody that Brandy had locked horns with, but like, I look at someone like that's audience, and I'm like, I don't want an audience like that who just says retarded shit all the time, or just relentlessly attacks people. Like, let's have a conversation here. That's what I'm all about.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think that the problem is that we're in the early days. This is the early days. And we see it, right? Like, you get it. I hear exactly that you get it. You see it. You value your integrity. You care about the long term. What we're seeing is the short-term incentives win out for some people. And that's an ancient failure that happened in mainstream media, that happened in mainstream art. Like this thing of like, oh, let me just make the thing that will get the most views. That is not unique to social media. It's just that now all of us have the capacity to fail in the way that we thought was once reserved for people that worked in media, whether it was entertainment or in news. And so we have to, this is all conundrums basically end in two ways. Either you are the ones that are left behind and you will be the warning for the future, or you will move forward and you will adapt and you will help to highlight the path that others can take. Right now, we're in the early days. And I think I take solace in that. I try to remind myself, like, technology moves faster than we do. And so while that's both a scary thing, because I think like we were not used to Twitter at all when it was called Twitter. Now it's called something else. We're still not used to that. Just the changing of the name, and everybody's like, Twitter X, you know, like we're not even able to adapt to that quickly. And then it became monetized, and like every day, whether you notice it or not, they're tweaking something. So this thing is not even static. So how can we possibly adapt to something that is not even actually static when we are designed to evolve and adapt over hundreds of thousands of years? So it is a bleak situation in that respect. It's going to be very hard for us to adapt to that. But I have some hope because we have done it. Like we haven't all just like exploded because it was made. Like it's chaos, but there's beacons of hope. And so ultimately that's really the choice that it is. It's like over time, there's like cultural messaging things that happen. And this is also kind of messed up because of social media in a way, because like culture, there's like echo chambers in the culture where it's like, certain information does not reach people within the same actual culture.
Because the algorithms also create these fake
exactly
echo
reality tunnel.
Yeah, exactly. So like on TikTok, I know how their algorithm works is extremely insidious in my opinion, because it like it does kind of it's basically like what all the other algorithms do, but like times 10. Like it's very good at figuring you out, and it's very good at like understanding what you're gonna want to see. But it creates like a fake culture, like a fake like microculture, I guess, but it's not actually real, like in the real world.
It's super, super weird. And that's the thing that I think it's like we're gonna start to see the fallout. And I can't predict the timeline. I have no idea. I would have to take some time to study and see like how quickly did we develop fairly collective understandings, like communal understandings of like things that were happening with our technology. And it was like, oh, you know, like your parents would tell you like, don't chat to strangers. And it's like, okay, we all kind of knew not to chat to strangers on the internet. So like, what are those things that as we have gone along, where we've kind of like developed these collective wisdoms about like, oh, okay, you don't want to do that, or like that's
we do need to come up with like a 10 commandments for social media to pass on to our children, like for sure. Like I feel you right now, because I do think we need to think about these things, like what are like, as especially like as like I'm a millennial, so like I've been on the internet since it was dial-up back then. Like it was a different beast when I got on the internet.
Get off the phone.
Yeah, it was a different beast back then. But like I've been on the internet since 5th grade. Like I think. So it's like what have we learned since like from then, and like how it's evolved from Facebook, from what it was to even now, you know? Because like for even people that are maybe Gen Z, they might not even remember what Facebook was, you know? They might not even know what it used to be before there was like a fucking news feed, and it was just timelines, you know? Like it was just profiles, and you didn't have like an algorithm feeding you shit. That was like the downfall of the end, you know? The beginning of the end.
It's crazy about like those stages of social media, because in some ways I find myself craving some of those things. Like I think also another thing that's very useful is just like be willing to experiment with how you use social media. And don't take for granted that like, oh, if this is how the app works, I'll just use it that way. who fucking cares? Like, use it the way that you want. Like, whatever that means. Like, if you want to be like, I'm going to private my Twitter and that's how I'm going to use it, even if I'm just shouting into the void, like, try it for a week. Like, see how it changes the way that you make content. See how it changes the way that you write, what you post. Even if you just do that for a week, you'll realize, oh, wow, I am actually censoring myself a lot. And do I like that? Is it good? Or is it on things that really actually matter to me? And now when my Twitter is privated, I'm more free to say those things. Whatever it is, do the thing with like a close friends post. So that Twitter has that, maybe has that. I don't know.
The circles,
Instagram.
yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't even know it was a thing.
I've never used that personally, but I have used it for Instagram where they have like the close friends version where you can post stories and things like that it's only your friends see it. And it's like all of these things are just ways to gain some information about like how it's like giving you a control group where it's like, oh, I act a little differently if this setting is changed. Another thing that's fun is like to have a totally private like burner account, because while I don't really use that much, I've heard that that's a fun experiment because, again, it's just like, so how do you act when you're anonymous? How do you change then when you're on the internet and you're anonymous? Is it for the worst? Is it
for the worst, right? I think a lot of people, it's for the worst.
Yeah. And see, that's like my thing is that I think if you're using a anonymous account just so you can do shit that you wouldn't do normally, I think there's a very odd incentive about that because like, I'm not saying that people should be canceled for the things they say, but like there are repercussions that you should feel if you're saying things. Like if you're telling people, hey, I'll beat your fucking ass.
There's zero accountability, back to like the personal responsibility we're talking about. How people can do things without having to have any responsibility. It's the same thing.
Exactly. And that's kind of why I do pride myself on using my real name. And like I if I go back and do it over again, I would probably be anonymous knowing what I know now. But at the same time, I carry a certain pride saying like, you know what, that cost me actually a pretty good career. But I mean, I know that I said what I wanted to say with my name and people know what I'm about. And there's no ifs, ands, or asses. There's no misunderstandings. You know who I am. And that's how I feel. And that's just the way it is. Take it or leave it. But once again, I don't besiege people and I don't, necessarily disagree with them if they think like, hey, I'd rather stay anonymous, just not take the heat.
I have an alias, but people can still find me. Like it doesn't, it really doesn't. I guess if I didn't show my face, maybe it would be easier. But I feel like unless you're like completely anonymous, even like an alias, it doesn't really protect you that much.
Yeah, well,
people
like I
said,
I think if you're being anonymous just so that way you could talk shit to people and not pay the consequence of it, I think you're a little bitch.
Yeah. Like a moment for self-awareness, right? Because it's like, okay, so when I want to say things that I don't want any repercussions for, I don't stand behind them. And it's like, okay, so you don't stand behind the things you say. That's not
exactly.
You shouldn't say those things then, maybe. And all of that is like, I think we just need to be more self-aware when we use these platforms. In some ways, they're really freaky because so much of it is about our psychology. And it impacts how we think about ourselves, how we think about the world, how we act. I mean, they are largely based on mechanisms that are part of behavioral psychology. So like the way that scientists train rats to do things is the way that social media works. And I know that like, that's kind of the little cliche of like, oh yeah, we know the little dopamine hits. And it's like, but do you realize what that means? And do you realize that it's still happening every single time you open the app, even if you already know that? Like, are you really aware of when you're getting that little dopamine hit and when you're being the rat? And so I think there's a really odd and spooky way that social media's banality and like the omnipresence of it, the fact that it's like, oh, it's just social media, like everybody has a Facebook, everybody's on it, it's whatever. Like this, it becomes mundane and it becomes so normal that we forget to be suspicious of it and to be careful with it. And that's something that happens with a lot of different things when people don't realize how bad the thing is and they're really the guinea pig generation.
I mean, this happened with soda.
Yes.
Like with soda, it was like completely normalized. No one thought it was bad, but like it gets to a point. If you drink a lot of soda, it's not good for you,
Right.
Like, and social media, it's like the same thing where obviously I think social media, like is do I think it's a net positive? Like I'm trying to like, was it a net positive or a net negative? I think that it was a net positive, I think. But I think it's hard because like it's moderation, and it's one of those things that we have
Yeah.
a really hard time moderating because of the dopamine aspect of it. And I think that and like that's the problem, is people forget that it is addictive.
Well,
Yes.
it,
You
it's
know?
funny that you brought it, that you mentioned pop right before that. But basically, like, okay, so we don't really have any mechanisms that I hate to say it, but like force us to get off social media. So I mean, like, I'm sure every single person who's on social media has done it at least once. You've spent probably the majority of a day scrolling through Twitter, on Facebook, doing something that you could probably use that time in a wiser way. But if you have a 12 pack of Coke downstairs, you could easily drink that entire thing. There's no real mechanism stopping you from doing that. Whereas before, there were, let's say, cultural, societal, or literal physical barriers from keeping you from becoming overweight, from doing something that you shouldn't be doing. Now that we have phones attached to our hips, and then, hey, I'm not even guilty, or, I'm guilty of it, having to wear them
And
on
I
my
work
wrist.
online, so it's
Yeah,
so easy for me to be online all the time because
right.
I'm constantly in front of a
Yeah, and
screen.
I have a computer. Yeah, I have a computer right in front, right beside my toolbox. So it's very easy for me to just be sitting here typing something and let me check Twitter real quick. And I do it. I
Done.
shouldn't, but I do it. But once again, there's no real way. You have to consciously moderate it. And what we find, and this is the same deal with like nutrition stuff, is that we're very, very bad estimators of like how much food we eat. And we're very, very bad estimators of how much time we could waste doing retarded shit, spending too much time on social media than we actually really understand.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think that's really what it comes down to is it's gonna be you. Like,
Hmm.
Mhm.
and that's a lot. That's true for a lot of things in our society. And you know what? I do agree with you that I think it's ultimately a net positive, because like any tool, those who
Hmm.
use it well will use it phenomenally. They will
Yeah.
do
Mhm.
amazing things with it, and I want them to be able to do that. And they shouldn't be penalized because some of us can't.
Yeah.
Um, I feel bad for those that can't, and I hope that as time
I
goes,
almost feel like those that can't are the majority, unfortunately, and which it goes back down to like kind of why we need a 10 commandments, right? Or like why we need like these guidelines to,
yeah,
this
Yeah.
is how you use this tool properly,
Well, okay,
right?
so I like that you said guidelines, by the way, because I think a lot of people, and you see this in nutrition literature when it comes to like when people think about food and how they want to restrict food. So, like, there's a disinhibition response. So, like, when people tell themselves, like, I cannot have this, then as soon as they break, it's like, okay, well, fuck it, I'm off to the races. I'm going to do whatever I want because if I already fucked up a little bit, I might as well fuck up a lot because I'm already there. So it's better to have like a guideline where like, okay, so like when we're talking about nutrition, let's say like, hey, just try to avoid added sugars, avoid, added oils, and then you're probably going to be okay. And maybe try to hit like sufficient protein, sufficient fiber, right? That's a pretty good guideline for a diet, but
yeah,
none of that tells you can't do anything. So like when you tell people you can't do something, what happens?
Yeah,
Eventually people break because nobody's 100%
it's
all the
true.
time. You could hit it, 80, 90% of the time, but when people break under stressful situations, which we all get into, that's when shit really hits the fan. So it's better to have like a guideline, like, hey, maybe I'll do Twitter on my downtime. Like if there's nothing going on, I'm walking around doing something, maybe I'll just scroll through real quick, but don't make a hard rule. I can't do it because once again, what's going to happen? You're going to
Well,
break that, and
also,
then you're going to feel like a failure because of that.
yeah, like warnings of like, cause so I love humanity, okay? I love people, and social media makes me misanthropic. Like
yeah,
if I'm on it too much, like especially if I'm on Twitter too much, like I'll start to lose that love for
me too.
humanity that I have, and I don't like that. And then I go out and I hang out with like my
Yeah,
friends who are, I have like political friends, and I have like apolitical friends. And when I go out with like my like the people that just like don't give a fuck about politics or culture war or anything like that, like, and then it reminds me, like, even just going out like downtown and like around people I don't even know, and people are just so nice, and
yes,
I'm like, okay, people are great, like, like, and I think that that is like a warning for people on social media, is that it can make you misanthropic, and it can make you lose that love for humanity if you had it. You know?
Yeah, so about a month ago, my band opened for Hinder, and then we also did like this big Rock for Life benefit where they give a lot of money to children in need. And I remember that whole weekend. I'm like, man, I just love life so much. And shocker, when things are going really good for you, you don't want to go on social media.
Yep.
You don't feel that bad about it. Life feels really good when you're in the and then I mean, maybe it's because I'm like an extroverted person, but like being around people that I care about and then just enjoying, we spent like an hour signing CDs, taking pictures and doing stuff like that, and then hanging out with the Hinder afterwards. Shit like that's fucking cool. And when you do things that you sincerely enjoy, you're not thinking about the worst of humanity. You're not thinking about that video that you saw on Twitter or the latest political ad. You're just having a good time. And I think it goes back to the whole touching grass thing. So I'm sorry to kind of steal your thunder there, Salome, but go ahead.
No, touching grass is my mantra. Like every day.
Yeah.
Grass.
The only thing that I feel like because I feel all of us probably have like we have friends, and like we can go out and like connect with people, but unfortunately I feel like a lot of people are very isolated and like don't have that, and I don't know if like COVID might have helped with that. Like I think that there is kind of like, I don't know what like the percentage of the population is, but I do think that there is kind of this percentage of terminally online people that aren't touching grass, but it's almost not just because they don't want to, it's because they might not have the ability to, or they don't have the connections, they don't have the network or anything. Like, what advice would you give to those people?
Go read Homath's tweets if you want to see that kind of person. Sorry.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, the priority would be to resolve that as a problem.
Yeah.
And that's hard because oftentimes there may be very good reasons for that. And coming back to that theme of the way that our society is so successful at allowing us to avoid uncomfortable things, that's one of these things that I think social media is really dangerous about, because it allows us to think that we're replacing social connection, when in reality, it really can't compare. You need to be physically around people. We're human beings. We're designed to be physically around us. We didn't evolve with FaceTime. Like, that's not even something I think that our old animal brain really comprehends. And there's just something about that, like, energy of being with people in person. And people understood that when it was COVID, because it was like, yeah, sure, we're all Zooming and FaceTiming and whatever, but like, you still want to go out with your friends to a bar or a concert or something, right? Like, you miss those things. And so they matter. And so it's like, even if you don't have friends, if you don't have those good friends, you can still go to places where there are people in communion doing something. And that's concerts, that's theater, that's like any kind of public thing where there's
church
people. Yeah, church, if that's your thing. Like,
yeah, if that's your thing. Like, and that's the thing. It's like, yeah, I think getting people into groups, but then it's like, okay, well, what if they're introverts? It's like, how do people work? Like, I think they just have to work on those kind of qualities within themselves. I consider myself an ambivert, but like, where it's like I'm a mix of both, but I can be pretty extroverted. So I don't really know what it's like to be like a complete introvert, and how difficult that might be for people to actually break out of that. And there's like the silver lining where social media does give them more connection, and it probably feels like it is the most social connection they've ever had, because they're not extroverted people and they haven't really been able to do that in real life. So it's like, it's kind of hard to figure out like the solution there.
Yeah, I think that there's I mean, it's one thing to be an introvert, and then you have to be mindful of like at what level it becomes more like pathological people avoidance, which I'm absolutely guilty of. I'm more towards that like kind of introvert, or at least like a homebody thing. Like, I will, once people are in front of me, it's like, let's go, like, let's talk. I have very open, but get out and to make the social things happen, I'm usually like, I'm content to just stay home and chill. Like, I don't really need to talk to people or do anything until I do it. And then I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
love doing this. Why do I always not want to do it until I'm doing it? And so there is that like self-knowledge that's useful in knowing when you're doing which version. When it's like, you know what, I really just don't feel like hanging out. Like I don't want to be in a crowd. That like I don't like crowds. But every now and then I'm like, I need to go see a concert. Like I need to get my ass out of the house and go to a place where everybody is looking at the same thing and appreciating the same thing. And we're all in the moment together. And I'll go by myself. Like I've gone to concerts by myself and it's a totally fine experience because it's not a place where you're like, oh, it's weird that I'm not talking to someone. Like you're not supposed to be talking to anybody there. You're supposed to be watching the band or whatever. And so there are instances like that where you can kind of get away with like, yeah, maybe I don't have a bunch of friends or I don't want to talk to someone, but like I need to meet my human social needs quota for the week or whatever. And things like that are useful. And it really requires that like kind of self-knowledge. I think that so many things like this now with technology and just like what we're eating and like when we're eating and just like the lifestyles we live, only you know if you're cutting corners. Only you're going to know when there's those subtle like lines where it's like, are you an introvert or are you avoiding people? And like it's pathological and eventually this behavior is going to catch up with you and you're going to regret it. Like you're the one that knows that. And it is ultimately our responsibility to kind of create that life that we want by being honest with ourselves about what we're doing and whether we're doing the things we need to do to have that life. It's obviously always easier said than done, but that is kind of like the ever-present theme with so many of the traps in our society now.
Oh, so I actually saw a tweet that you made. And this goes back to the social media discussion. And we're all libertarians here. So you said that social media is the best argument for libertarianism. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
For the very reason it makes you misanthropic, it makes me libertarian. Because these people better never be in charge of anything that has anything to do with me. I don't want any of these people making decisions that impact my life. And I feel like it's a funny thing because you only really get it if you're a libertarian because you have that like mental framework to understand that I can really dislike what other people are doing, but as long as that's their problem, I can live my life. And having that kind of framework where it's like, okay, this is a systems problem. I don't need everybody to be a great, upstanding member of society that agrees with me and lives the way I want to live. I would never be a happy person if I needed that. I would be forever pursuing some kind of like grand central planning authoritarian utopia. And so once you kind of make peace with like, okay, we're never going to have that. That's never going to happen. So either you have like a perpetual battle between like us versus them to see who gets to dictate who, or you figure out a way to give people the maximum amount of self-determination without hindering the self-determination of each other. And so when I look at social media and people are like, oh, well, she shouldn't have a body count of higher than this. Or if you do this, then if you say these words, you shouldn't do this. People that watch this movie are midwits. People that read this author are like, it's like, love that for you. You go live that life.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try to make our culture be that way though. Like, don't try to be like, and this is why our schools must teach X, Y, Z. Like, no, you can start a private school where your school teaches X, Y, Z. But we have this big problem in our culture where we think that our beliefs must be enforced on everybody, or we're not going to gain the benefit of those beliefs. And it's like, there's ways to live the life that you want, live the beliefs that you believe in, and share them and actually impact the world around you with them willingly, voluntarily, instead of trying to fight with people to be like, you're going to live this way because I'm going to vote this November and you'll see how we're all going to live. Like, why are we doing this to each other? This sucks. So when I look at social media, I'm just like, look at all of these insane different people. All of these people, like, all day arguing about things that it doesn't matter. It doesn't actually matter. You don't need to settle this debate with some stranger that, like, you're never going to meet and lives on the other side of the country.
I'm guilty of it.
That's what social media does to us. That's about it. It's like, I really got to tell this person that lives in like a province in Canada why that is not an okay thing to do in your backyard or whatever. It's like, what is going on here? Like, I feel like I'm getting tricked into caring about things that I don't actually really need to care about. Mm-hmm. And there's this sense by which social media, and also there's just kind of like, I haven't figured out a name for it, but there's this like, I think there probably is a correct name for it, but it's like you'd call it journalizing. So it's like when I take a very normal thing and I journalize it, I make it seem really important and urgent, when actually it's very mundane and you wouldn't think about it this way until I journalized it and presented it to you in this way of like, oh, this is a big deal. Actually, we need to fight about this. So there's so many things, like particularly with the dating discourse stuff, that I'm like,
oh gosh,
do it. We don't need to do it. Like, it doesn't matter. You can date who you want. You can live as you want, and you can share those ideas too. It's fine. Like, I'm not saying like everybody keep it to themselves, but like the idea that I have to make other people see it this way, and that like if our whole society doesn't start being this way very soon, it is certain death for us all. Like, that something's wrong, because that's really never been the purview of everyday people. Like, if you were the president or like some person that's like, okay, my job actually is to influence the events on a large scale, okay, you should think about like, how do I make this thing for society happen? I don't like that you're thinking about that personally as a libertarian. I don't want someone thinking about how can I influence mass numbers of people. I don't like that. But if that's literally your job's purview, that makes sense. But now we have people that it's like, I'm a painter, I am an accountant, I am the owner of the local coffee shop, and I'm trying to figure out how we must structure our society. And it's like, you are going to be mentally ill. Like, that's going to make you crazy. Either you have a certain makeup, like there's some of us are crazy like that. We like to talk about these things. Usually it's libertarians. Like, libertarians really like thinking about this shit. But they don't tend to do it in like as much of a like, I'm freaking out way, because it's just like, I think libertarians tend to be, no offense.
Oh, I know a lot of crazy libertarians, but
we got our few. But like, like a little bit like a touch of autism in some way. Like, I will talk about these things in a very like kind of subdued, rational way, as opposed to being like, you're evil. No, you're evil.
Yeah.
Everybody has those, but I've found, like, as a person that has like worked with a lot of libertarians, I'm like, damn, I've never had more pleasant political conversations and like more insightful conversations than with people that are like, tend to be on the right, but also tend to be like libertarian minded. They just tend to be people that have like read a fuck ton about their politics. So they have like that background for it. But nonetheless, it's like most people really don't benefit from that sense of like, I have to figure out how everybody has to live and like the future of our society and how to structure it and like all these things. And it's like, this is why I really do believe like libertarianism is a solution to a lot of problems, because it's not that we pick a final answer. It's that we subvert the problem entirely. It's actually like, we don't have to pick one way or the other. You can do your thing and I can do my thing. That's why it's such a great compromise. Instead of like, okay, this election season, we're going to figure out like how we're going to make hundreds of millions of people live in this way. And it's just like, yeah, that's going to create a lot of conflict. That's like a recipe for conflict. And that's ultimately why I look at social media. I'm like, yeah, it makes me misanthropic, because there's so many examples of just people being at their absolute worst, largely because of social media. Like, it brings it out of us. They could be lovely people out and about in the world. I'm sure they're lovely brothers, sisters, spouses, parents, all of that, teachers, whatever. But when they get on social media, their worst side comes out, because that's what these mediums do oftentimes. And I look at that and I'm like, I don't want you making laws about.
I know. There's people on social media that I love dearly in person, but like they're the way that they behave on social media, I'm like, oh God. Like,
Yeah.
so, like they just become they're nothing like that in person though.
Yes.
That's the crazy part. They're like completely different. But then on the internet they're just like absolute demons and you're like, what?
What
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to like the whole reality tunnel thing where like a lot of people kind of sculpt their whole reality. Like anytime I hear people start saying they want you dead or like this conspiracy here, conspiracy there, I'm like, all right, I think you need to get offline. So, Brainy, I know you really like this because I've been having a field day with this, but I talked about it a little bit on Post Zero, which my podcast with my buddies from like the Manosphere space. Um, but Myron Gaines from Fresh and Fit said, I couldn't believe it when he said this, but he seriously said, I believe that 50% of very attractive women have done some sort of sex work, and about 30% of average looking women have done some kind of sex work. I'm like, that is like the most terminally online shit I've ever heard in my life.
It's
I
like
think it's
less
time to
than
log the fuck
2%.
off.
It's
Yeah,
like less than 2%.
so like,
So
but like what he said there, that would suggest like what, let's say
So
40%, 35% of all women have done sex work. Like, dude, are you serious? Come on.
well, because it's to demoralize you. Like I've been
Right.
reading Yuri. Oh God, I never
Yuri
remember.
Bezmenov.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've been reading like his letter to a love letter to America, and I've like posted about it a few times because whenever I read something, I get like I'm like super into it. I'm like, I want to share this with the world, even though no one probably cares. But like he talks about this like demoralizing, and now I'm like seeing it. He calls it agents of influence, and obviously this was before the internet, and I'm like, that's what influencers are.
Literally.
Agents of influence. And so like, and I do think that, and like they get off on demoralizing people because I think that people honestly, it is almost addictive to like be a victim and to think that the world is shit, and like there is like this almost like addictive spiral to like, I don't, it's like very dark, but it's like I think it can be addictive for a lot of people. And like I think someone like Myron, like that's what they do is they're just demoralizing men about women. I have a dude that if you're watching, bro, like please seek help. He's in my replies and he says like the most insane things about women, as if like all women are complete evil, degenerate, horrible thing. And it's like I know that he's just been consuming way too much of that content that has like completely fucking warped his brain. He probably hasn't seen a real woman in years or something.
Yeah,
like
that's what I mean. Like, have you gone out and talked to a
Right.
woman like
know.
ever? Like, I think you probably need to just go out and talk to people, go to the grocery store and realize, oh yeah, there's like a nice looking woman at the checkout counter who probably has her life together and is doing well. And then, you're going to see another woman who's probably married with a husband who's perfectly happy. Like, this is kind of the way actually most women function. Even if you want to get myopic about the body count shit, guess what? They're still going to be okay. Even if they fucked a whole bunch of dudes, there's always going to be a guy who's going to be willing to take it up and completely forget about all that shit. And you got to accept that as a guy. And as a guy, you kind of have to realize like, oh, I may not be okay.
Well,
if
this
I
is
don't
the problem
put in
is
some
that
work.
no, because the problem is that a lot of like this is like the issue. I like, and I love you, Kyle, and like a lot of the red pill guys, some of them I like more than others. But the issue is like it is even the red pill stuff, even though that's not what the intention is, a lot of it is demoralizing to men because men internalize it in this way. It doesn't matter what, like, they're like, we're trying to just give you these truths, these honest truths, right? But like, it's not really, because they're always like hyperbolic and somewhat generalizing, and it makes these men feel like, oh, women are shit. Like it always ends up looking like that in the end.
Well,
And
I think
feminists
that's
do the
why,
same. Like
yeah.
there's like these certain particular types of like rad feminists that are the exact same way about men. where it's like all
It's
men
the
are
way
like
that
this.
Right.
it's the way that we kind of loosely talk about groups, and I think you kind of see this in with language in general. And I mean, it even evolves beyond what we're talking about here. Like when it comes to politics, stuff like that, is that there's always like kind of like this in group and the out group. And if you can find a way to identify yourself as a victim, then you can find your oppressor, and then you can find some kind of narrative to tell other people, and then develop this whole story. Because I mean, really, why do we enjoy movies so much? Just because of the narrative and the story. And this is like deeply ingrained in us to the way that we like to kind of consume stuff. So like when you can kind of build this narrative, then it's very easy to once again be hyperbolic about it and sell people some kind of narrative. So I mean, I know I mentioned our friend Ryan Stone earlier, but I think he's really kind of like the best amongst this whole red pill sphere, because he always says women are women. That's it. He doesn't tell you they're good or bad. Women are women. That's exactly what it is. And then even like all the stuff, he just finished his whole Mids Watch series, which is like a whole series about like old red pill forms and stuff like that. But though literally he capped it off with like, oh yeah, nobody here really knows what they're doing. So listen to all this and figure out what you want to do. That's literally how he capped off like years and years of work. But I mean, that's the truth of it, is that like the vast majority of the time when you grow up, you don't really know what you're doing. You just kind of figure it out as you go. You're building the ship as you're going down the river. And guess what? The vast majority of the time, shit kind of turns out okay. As long as you're not a fucking asshole to people, you're probably going to be fine.
Yeah.
So this has been a fun conversation, guys. I've enjoyed it a lot.
Great.
So can you give like a little where people can find you, what you're up to, what you've been doing, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. People can follow me on Instagram and on Twitter at Salomé Siboney. It's just my name as it's spelled here without the accent. You can also find me writing for my publication, The Black Sheep. It's wetheblacksheep.com. And we publish weekly guest articles of people that have left destructive collectives, whether it's like communist countries or leftism or feminism, things like that. So great stories of people kind of like finding that individual path, as well as my own like black sheep praxis, I call it, where it's like, how do you actually check yourself for that kind of like collectivist instinct and start developing as an individual and keep like that forward momentum. And where else can I be found? Honestly, not a lot of places. I'm not trying to be found in too many places. So those are the good ones to find me on.
Kyle, what you got going on?
Yeah, more stuff that I could ever even list. If you're in the Ron Paul Institute event this weekend, I will be there. So hit me up, and I would love to meet you, hang out with you, whatever. I'll be with the guys from the Libertarian Institute. But yeah, in Liberty and Health, I'm gonna have my buddy Rob Says on this Wednesday night. Obviously, everybody have a good Labor Day, but commoncrown.com as well. Post 0 on Sundays. I will not be on this Sunday. You can find me here as well as 5 till midnight, and commoncrown.com for my band and all my music stuff. We're going to have new music hopefully here soon. We got a whole ton of new material. I'm super excited to release that. And Salomé, it was a very, very enjoyable conversation. I threw you a follow on Twitter. So maybe we should set something up sometime, because I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, that was great. I would love to do that.
Cool.
And I will be streaming video games and vibing later. And thank you so much, Salomé. This was awesome.
Thank you for
and bye, guys. Oh, and we did. This was one of my favorite shows that y'all have done. Great guest.
Oh,
Love that.
Beautiful.
Awesome.